I'm Savannah Cole, 28, and I stepped out of the rideshare with a silk scarf in my purse and a promotion on the horizon. The late afternoon sun warmed the sidewalk, the kind of light that makes every front porch look kinder than it is. I rolled my suitcase to our gate, ready to tell my mother I'd closed the biggest contract of my career. Then I saw them thick, black contractor bags lined up like a barricade, knotted tight and waiting. My brothers and sister were on the lawn in a straight row, my mother in the middle with her arms folded. The neighbors had paused mid-errand to watch, as if a show had started without notice. I tightened my grip on my keys until the ridges pressed crescents into my palm. Whatever this was, it had been arranged with care. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and tap like and subscribe if you've ever had to hold your head high when home didn't feel like home. I grew up in this house, a narrow 2-story, with a maple tree that used to scrape the upstairs windows in a storm and a back fence my father mended every spring. He was a shop teacher who believed in quiet craftsmanship, the kind of man who showed love by fixing a wobbly table and leaving a note that said, "Try it now." When he passed, I was 8, and the world split into before and after. A family friend read his will at a desk too tall for my feet to reach the floor, and I learned that 1/5 of this house had my name on it. My mother kept the deed in her drawer with the birth certificates and the stamped envelopes. We were told the house was our security, our anchor, the thing we would never have to question. That promise became a kind of lullaby we hummed to ourselves in lean years when the roof needed patching and we stretched groceries until Friday. I was the last to leave childhood behind inside these walls. Caleb joined a construction crew out of state. Brooke married and moved across town. Tyler tried college and then a sales job that kept him on the road. I stayed through my early 20s because it made sense. I covered a larger share of the utilities paid into the property taxes, took early trains and late Ubers, and built a career in digital marketing. One stubborn client at a time. Work took me from local campaigns to regional pitches, and this month to Seattle, where I sat across from a boardroom of hard questions and left with a signed contract I'd chased for a year. That contract felt like proof of steadiness of worth, of all the small choices I'd made to keep going when it was easier to quit. I bought the scarf for my mother in robin's egg blue because she loves that color. I imagined her fingers smoothing the silk while I told her about next steps and new possibilities. We were not a showy family, but we believed in appearances and keeping noise inside and lawn edges straight. My mother can quiet a room with a single glance. She grew up in a house where you handled your business and stood up straight for church. She held to that rule book after Dad died, and there were days it helped and days it didn't. I learned early to measure my words and deliver good news tidily, to line facts up and tuck the corners in. The truth, though, is that hard years shift a foundation. Small cracks spread under the paint, and you only see them when the light hits just right. Lately, the light had found places I didn't expect. Missed calls returned days later, clipped answers when I mentioned travel, a tension that settled into the kitchen like a draft. The city I work in now speaks a different language than the one I grew up with. At the office, decisions move fast. Numbers go up or down and tell their own story. Out here on the block, where everyone knows who taught you to ride a bike and who shoveled your sidewalk the winter of the ice storm, change moves in whispers. I straddle both worlds on most days, bringing home fruit from vendor trays and stories from client floors, trying to make those two versions of myself fit. When the Seattle deal closed, I thought bringing that win back to this address would knit the pieces together, the steady, practical daughter and the woman who earned a seat at the table. I imagined a kitchen toast, maybe even my mother's rare smile that reaches her eyes. I didn't imagine a half circle of faces on the lawn. The bags at the gate didn't look like clutter waiting for the curb. They looked packed and decided tied with the same neatness my mother brings to everything. My sister had her hands tucked in the front pocket of her sweatshirt. My brothers stared at the sidewalk as if something important was written there. The maple leaves above us flickered in the wind, throwing scattered shade across the pathway I'd walked 1,000 times. I set my suitcase upright, slipped my fingers into the purse to feel the fold of silk, and tried to make sense of how quickly a place can change tone. My mother lifted her chin the way she does when she's reached a conclusion and is about to announce it. I drew a breath and took one step forward while the key in my palm pressed the shape of what I thought I knew. My mother's voice carried across the yard even, and practiced the way she always spoke when she wanted control of a moment. "Savannah, you're 28. It's time to be on your own." She said it as if she were reciting a line from a script, her hands folded neatly in front of her. Behind her, Caleb, Brooke, and Tyler stood like anchors, avoiding my eyes, but not moving from her side. The bags stacked by the gate looked heavier than they should, each one tied with the same care she used when sealing holiday cookie tins. I gripped the handle of my suitcase, still warm from the sun, and tried to understand why everything felt like it had already been decided. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, quieter than I intended. "What's going on?" I asked. No one shifted, no one softened. My mother's chin lifted slightly as she delivered the next blow. "The house is sold. The buyers want it now." The words struck hard, heavier than the suitcase at my feet. "Sold," I managed straighter now. "You didn't ask me. My name is on this house." Caleb stepped forward, his tone calm, almost rehearsed. "This is for your own good, Savannah. You need a push to grow up." For a moment I thought maybe I had misheard, that this was some odd lesson, a poor attempt at tough love. But then my mother added, "Your share of the money will be less. We've calculated what you should have been paying in rent all these years." She smoothed her blouse as if tidying the air between us, while the neighbors pretended not to stare. My siblings kept their attention on the grass, the hedges anywhere but my face. The house I had cared for, the property taxes I had paid into, none of it seemed to matter now. I stepped toward the bags, untying the first one. Inside were my winter sweaters folded carelessly. The next held my books, the third my shoes, and tucked between them was the silk scarf I had carried back from Seattle, crushed against a pair of worn sneakers. I pressed the scarf into my pocket, my fingers smoothing the fabric, while something deep inside me shifted, small but definite. The contract in my laptop bag suddenly felt heavier than before, not as proof to anyone, but as armor for myself. When I bent to lift another bag, a folded sheet of paper slipped free and landed face up on the sidewalk. I picked it up, my stomach tightening as I realized what it was. A real estate listing, glossy and neat, showing the rooms of our house, my room. The date at the top was 2 months old. I stared at the photographs, my desk with framed pictures still in place, my closet door half open, my comforter smooth on the bed. They had let strangers walk through my space while I was working, believing everything here was safe. The phone buzzed in my hand, Nora's name flashing on the screen. "Any update, spare rooms ready if you need it." My eyes lingered on the pictures of the house, the private spaces laid bare. Behind me, Mrs. Pierce across the street called out, "Need help with those bags?" Her shears were still in her hand, her eyes sharp with curiosity. I forced my voice steady. "I'm fine, thank you." But my chest ached with a different truth. I wasn't fine. By dusk, the bags were loaded into my car. I drove to Nora's apartment where she and Grant pulled the door open before I even knocked. Her living room smelled of peppermint tea, her couch piled with blankets. I sat cross-legged on the floor, laptop open, scrolling through social media while she urged me to put it away. I couldn't. My family had gone to dinner, celebrating with champagne at a restaurant reserved for milestones. My mother had posted a photo, glasses lifted high. "New beginnings for everyone," the caption read. Brooke commented beneath it, relieved they'd gotten full value. Tyler replied about rising property prices, noting they had acted just in time. I scrolled until I found Caleb's post, pictures of strangers touring the house, his words beneath fresh, "Start for all of us." My fingers hovered over the screen, unable to move. Nora slid a mug of tea toward me. "You don't have to look," she said quietly, but I couldn't pull my eyes away. The people I thought I knew had waited for me to leave town, had arranged every step, and then celebrated when I came home to garbage bags and locked doors. That night I lay awake on Nora's pull-out couch, the blanket scratchy against my skin. My mind moved in circles. I had no home, no place to land, and rent in the city was nearly twice what I earned. Every search pulled up numbers I couldn't reach, leases that required deposits I didn't have. My savings had been drained by student loans, the ones I worked extra hours to keep current. Now the family who had claimed to raise me with responsibility and fairness had left me with nothing but a pile of bags and a scar where home used to be. The next morning, sunlight pushed through the blinds, and I opened my laptop again, staring at listings that mocked me with their prices. I couldn't keep sleeping on Nora's couch. I couldn't drag her into the storm any more than she already was. But every apartment I clicked made the pit in my stomach deepen. I rubbed my temples and scrolled, knowing I was already slipping behind at work, already risking the promotion that had once felt within reach. My phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't Nora. It was my mother's message sent to our entire extended family. We were forced to take difficult steps with Savannah. She refused to grow up despite our patience. Sometimes love requires hard choices. I sat at the table reading the words again until they blurred. My stomach turned, my coffee cooling beside me as the responses came in one by one. Invitations revoked, relatives expressing disappointment, cousins urging me to reflect on my mistakes. Nora leaned against the counter, watching me close the laptop with shaking hands. She's rewriting everything I said, my voice low, and they're all believing it. The silence that followed felt heavier than the bags I had hauled the day before. I stepped to the window and stared at the street below. Cars moving in steady lines, people carrying groceries, children in backpacks running to catch the bus. The world moved on, unaware that mine had been upended. And as I stood there gripping the scarf in my pocket, I realized the foundation I had trusted all my life had been pulled from under me. What I didn't know yet was that the betrayal I had just uncovered was only the beginning. The days after the eviction blurred together long stretches of searching for apartments broken by moments that cut sharp. I opened listing after listing, the numbers glaring from the screen like closed doors. Most required deposits I couldn't afford. My savings would barely stretch 3 months, and my commission from Seattle wouldn't arrive for another 90 days. Each time I refreshed the page, the options looked smaller and more out of reach. Nora tried to distract me with walks around her neighborhood. Her arm looped through mine as if she could steady me by force. "We'll find something," she kept saying, but I could hear the thinness in her voice. At night, I unfolded the couch bed she and Grant had given up for me. The springs creaked every time I turned, and the blanket scratched against my skin. I stared at the ceiling, counting the shadows from the streetlight outside, while my mind replayed the sound of my mother's announcement. "The house is sold. The buyers want it now." Work became harder to hold on to. I showed up at the office with tired eyes, concealer failing to cover the circles that deepened each day. My focus slipped during meetings. I blamed it on a lingering cold when Diane asked why I seemed distracted. But even as I explained implementation strategies, my thoughts darted to rental prices and unanswered emails from property managers. One afternoon, I sat across from a man named Martin, the manager of a small apartment complex with beige walls and thin carpet. He tapped at his computer, frowning at the screen. "Your credit isn't clean," he said, his voice flat. I leaned forward, confused. "That can't be right. My score was 780 last month." He turned the monitor so I could see. There they were, 5 unpaid utility bills from 3 years ago, all tied to an address I had never lived at. I spent the next 3 hours on hold with companies that shuffled me between departments. The truth finally surfaced when a representative explained the accounts had been opened with my Social Security number. The address listed belonged to Caleb. The total unpaid balance was over $3,700. I hung up with the phone pressed to my forehead, the silence of Nora's kitchen settling heavy around me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I watched the red digits of the clock on the microwave tick forward while every calculation spun in my mind. My savings couldn't cover the false debts and a deposit at the same time. My paychecks would vanish before they cleared. By dawn, my eyes burned with exhaustion, but I pulled myself together, dressed, and went into the office. The campaign revisions needed for the Seattle client were due, and I forced myself through the presentation with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. When I came home that evening, Nora set a leather-bound journal in front of me on the table. "Start writing everything down," she said. "Dates, bills, conversations. Don't rely on memory." I opened the first page, the paper smooth and unmarked, and began a timeline. Each entry steadied me, the act of writing turning chaos into something I could see. The journal grew quickly screenshots, copies of listings, calculations of damages. It became the one thing I could control. The apartment search dragged on. 12 viewings in 2 weeks, each one worse than the last. Peeling paint, broken locks, ceilings stained with water. I began to dread the moment when managers asked for applications. Every time my heart pounded, wondering if the fraudulent bills would surface again. And every time they did. At the 12th, showing a man named Henry Benton looked up from my paperwork, his reading glasses slipping down his nose. "Savannah Cole," he said slowly. "You created that campaign for River City? Bikes, didn't you?" I blinked, caught off guard, then nodded. "That was me." His mouth lifted in a small smile. "That's my brother's shop. You saved his business." Sales jumped 40% after that ad. He leaned back in his chair. For the woman who did that, I might have something not listed. It was the first time in weeks I felt my shoulders release. A day later, my mother texted asking to meet at Riverside Coffee. Nora warned me not to go, but I agreed. Some part of me still wanted answers. The cafe hummed with voices and the hiss of the espresso machine. My mother sat by the window, a blue cardigan wrapped around her shoulders, the same shade as the scarf I had tried to give her. She looked smaller, but her words carried the same edge. "You look tired," she said. I nodded, sliding into the chair. "We did this because we love you," she continued, reaching for my hand. I drew mine back to my lap. "Sometimes children need a push." I kept my voice steady. "Love doesn't put someone's belongings in garbage bags. Love doesn't sell their home without warning. And it doesn't open accounts in their name." Her face tightened. "You've always been dramatic. Everything I did was for your good. Marcus needed help with bills. You weren't using your credit." I rose, leaving money beside my untouched coffee. She called after me, louder now, using my full name. I kept walking past the curious glances, past the doorway into the open air. My chest felt lighter than it had in weeks. For the first time, her voice behind me didn't pull me back. That evening, Henry called to confirm the lease on the small studio he had promised. Clean walls, steady locks, and a window overlooking a community garden. It wasn't large, but it was mine. Nora and Grant carried boxes late into the night, their laughter softening the sharp edges of the move. They hung my photographs with care, leveling each frame as if it were art for a gallery. I stood back watching them place my belongings gently where my family had once thrown them into bags. 3 weeks later, I sat at my new desk polishing the strategy for the Seattle expansion. The client had requested me specifically, and the opportunity placed me squarely in line for the promotion I had been chasing. My phone buzzed during a late-night session, Darren's name lighting up the screen. The message was short. "Mom lost everything. She's going to call you." I set the phone down, staring at the words. The balance that had been stacked so carefully against me was shifting, and I knew the next call would change the path I was on once again. I stood in front of the Seattle executive team, my pointer circling the last slide when my phone lit up on the table beside me. 14 missed calls from my mother, stacked one on top of the other. The device buzzed again, sliding toward my notes, her contact photo flashing across the screen. I didn't pick it up. Instead, I looked straight into Diane Porter's eyes and spoke with the steadiness I had fought hard to reclaim. "With this rollout, you'll see an 18% increase in market penetration by fourth quarter." The words carried me through the moment past the interruptions into the silence of executives who leaned in and nodded. When the meeting ended, Barbara Harmon, the company's CEO, touched my elbow as the others filed out. "That was seamless," she said softly. "Between us, a leadership position will be opening soon. You should apply." Her words landed with a weight I had longed for but hadn't expected in that room, not while my phone still glowed with my mother's name. I left the building with the knowledge that something had shifted, not just in my career, but in the balance between what I was building and what I had left behind. On the way to the airport, I finally listened to her voicemail. Her voice carried the same false urgency I had grown up with. "Savannah, it's Mom. There's a family emergency. Call me right away." I found a quiet corner in the terminal before I returned the call. She answered on the first ring, her words tumbling in a rush. "The money from the house, it's gone. All of it. I invested with your father's old colleague. He promised 20% returns. It was a scam. Caleb and Brooke won't even speak to me. I need to stay with you until I get back on my feet." I sat in silence, the noise of the airport fading to a hum. The old version of myself would have rearranged everything, given up space, and bent to her need. But something in me held steady. "I'll think about it," I said, and ended the call before she could answer. That night, I texted Nora. "Emergency meeting." She replied within seconds. "Wine and pizza. 8 o'clock. Bring an overnight bag if you want." By midnight, Nora's laptop glowed on the table, a spreadsheet open with columns for local senior housing. She pointed to a complex with hanging flower baskets at the entrance. "This one's near that park she likes, walking distance to the church she used to attend." I leaned closer, the scarf I'd tucked into my pocket weeks ago, brushing against my hand. "It's nice," I said quietly, and it was. The next morning, I carried the folder of printouts into Dr. Doyle's office. Her room smelled faintly of chamomile and paper, a calm that steadied my breath. She listened while I explained the call, the request, and Nora's research. When I finished, she folded her hands. "Your mother's situation is not your emergency," she said evenly. "What boundaries feel right to you?" Together we crafted a plan. Support, but with limits. No moving in with me, no open-ended financial rescue, and therapy sessions required for continued help. "You're not abandoning her," Dr. Doyle said as I left. "You're offering healthy support while protecting yourself." That afternoon, I met my mother at Riverside Cafe. She wheeled a small suitcase behind her, a clear sign of her intent. She leaned down to kiss my cheek, her perfume familiar, pulling memories I no longer wanted. "You look wonderful," she said, her smile quick. "That color brings out your eyes. Is your apartment nearby, one bedroom, or a studio?" I placed the folder on the table instead. "Work is going well," I answered. "I wanted to talk about housing." Her smile faltered as I slid a printout toward her. "Sunnyvale Senior Apartments," I explained. "Your Social Security covers most of it. I'll contribute $250 a month to cover the rest. I've already paid the deposit." She pushed the page back across the table, her nails scraping lightly. "I don't need charity housing, Savannah. I need my daughter's support." Her voice rose, drawing glances from nearby tables. I reached into my bag and placed the scarf on the table between us, its robin's egg blue creased and worn. Her eyes flickered toward it, then away. "Support means conditions," I said. "Family therapy, clear limits, no living together." She stiffened her jaw tight. "Conditions, I'm your mother." I stood gathering my things. "Then I wish you the best," I said. Her voice cracked as I turned. "Wait. Fine. I'll try a session or two." I paused, then sat back down, sliding the folder toward her once more. Her hand shook slightly as she signed the pages I had marked with yellow tabs. When she finished, she looked up, her eyes narrowed. "Has Tyler called you?" "He's been quiet." I hesitated, then nodded. He texted, said he wanted to talk. She tucked the folder into her bag, her movements brittle. "Nothing," she murmured, "just wondering." As I walked away from the cafe, my phone buzzed again. This time it was an email from Samuel Ortiz, our company's CEO. "Savannah, based on your work with the Seattle account, I'm offering you the position of digital marketing team lead, effective immediately." I stopped in the sunlight, reading the words twice. For the first time in months, I smiled without effort. The balance of power had shifted, and I could feel it in my steps as I crossed the street. But I also knew the next call from my family would test how firm those boundaries truly were. The studio apartment smelled faintly of fresh paint the first night I slept there. The walls were bare, but sunlight filtered through the blinds in the morning, soft and warm across the hardwood floor. Nora and Grant spent that weekend helping me move in, carrying boxes up the narrow stairwell and setting them carefully on the floor. By midnight, the last of my belongings had been unpacked. They strung paper lanterns across the ceiling, their glow casting a gentle light over the photographs they had hung with care. I stood back looking at my framed landscapes, the ones my mother once dismissed as amateur, now centered on the walls as if they mattered. Nora tapped one of the frames lightly. "This is really good," she said, her voice steady. Grant nodded, stepping back to admire the balance of color and space. "Feels like a home," he added. Their care in arranging the pieces of my life softened the ache of how my family had treated those same belongings, tossed into bags without a thought. Over the next few weeks, I built routines into the small space. I worked at the desk, angled toward the morning light, revising strategies for the Seattle client. I cooked simple dinners on the stovetop and read in the evenings by the lamp Nora had found at a thrift store. The space was modest, but each detail was mine alone. The heaviness I carried began to lift with every quiet morning and late-night call with Nora, every photograph in its chosen place. 3 weeks after moving in, I returned to Seattle for the follow-up meeting. The client had asked specifically for me to lead the next phase, and I spent nights polishing my presentation until the numbers lined up perfectly. In that conference room, I stood straighter than before. My voice didn't waver as I explained projections and strategy. When the session ended, Barbara Harmon herself leaned forward, nodding with approval. "This is impressive," she said. "We'll expand into the education sector with your plan." Her words confirmed what I had already felt, that the effort of those sleepless nights had carried me to the edge of something bigger. That evening, as I packed up my notes in the hotel room, my phone buzzed. It was Darren this time, his name glowing across the screen. I hesitated before answering, but his voice came low and uneven. "Mom lost everything," he said. "She's been trying to reach you. She's going to call again." I sat on the edge of the bed, listening as he paused. "I know we were part of what happened. I know." His words trailed off into silence before he ended the call. The next morning, I boarded the plane with my phone face down in my lap. Messages stacked as the flight progressed, her number flashing again and again. By the time we landed, the voicemail box was full. I waited until I was driving home before I listened. "Savannah, it's Mom. I need to stay with you, just for a little while, until I figure this out." Her voice cracked slightly at the end, but the tone carried the same expectation I had grown up with. Back in my apartment, I set my phone on the counter and poured a glass of water, the scarf in my pocket, brushing against my hand as I moved. I thought of the conditions Dr. Doyle had helped me set the pages Nora and I had printed for Sunnyvale, the deposit I had already paid. I opened my laptop and sent an email instead of returning the call. The subject line was simple: next steps. The body outlined what I could offer: financial support, capped at a set amount, help with the move to senior housing and therapy sessions required. Nothing more. 2 days later, we met again at the cafe, the same window seat, the same steady hum of conversation around us. She placed her suitcase by the table, but I kept my eyes on the folder in my bag. She asked about my apartment again, whether it was large enough for guests, whether I had room for her things. I slid the application for Sunnyvale across the table instead. Her smile faltered. "This isn't what I need, Savannah." I kept my voice level. "It's what I can give." I placed the scarf between us, its creases a reminder of what I had carried from that day at the gate. Her shoulders stiffened, and for a moment she said nothing. Then slowly she signed where I had marked the pages. When she slid the folder back across the table, her eyes lingered on mine. "Fine," she said softly. "I'll go. But this doesn't feel like family." I gathered my things standing as her words hung in the air. My phone buzzed again before I left the cafe. It was another email, this time from Samuel Ortiz. "Savannah, congratulations. You've been promoted to team lead effective immediately." I stepped into the sunlight, the message glowing on my screen. For the first time in years, I felt the balance had shifted. I knew my mother would resist the conditions, and I knew my siblings might push back in their own ways. But as I walked down the street with the folder under my arm and the scarf in my pocket, I also knew I had set the terms. What I didn't yet know was how far those terms would be tested. The first Saturday of April carried a damp chill, the kind that clung to the air even when the sun broke through. I sat at my kitchen table with the scarf folded neatly beside my laptop, reviewing the upcoming campaign launch. The phone buzzed, Darren's name flashing across the screen again. I hesitated, then answered. His voice sounded rougher than usual. "Savannah, did Mom call you?" "Yes," I said quietly. "She told me about the money." There was a pause, then a sharp exhale. "There's more you should know." His words came slowly, as if he wasn't sure how much to reveal. "We knew she planned to invest before the sale. Caleb and Brooke and we didn't stop her." I pressed the heel of my hand against my forehead. "You all knew she was risking everything, and you still helped her throw me out." "It's complicated," Darren said. She told us it was safe that she'd already signed. We thought it might buy her peace of mind, but now it's all gone." His voice cracked, and I could hear regret threaded through it. "I've been thinking about what we did. I want to talk. Just us." I didn't answer right away. My fingers traced the edge of the scarf, the fabric worn from being folded and unfolded. "I'll think about it," I said finally. He thanked me and hung up, leaving the silence heavy in the apartment. That afternoon I met Nora at her place. She set a pot of tea on the table while I explained Darren's call. "He wants to talk," I said. He sounded different, but I don't know what to believe anymore. Nora poured the tea, her hand steady. "You don't owe him anything," she said. "But if you meet, do it on your terms, somewhere you feel safe." I nodded, the steam curling between us. The thought of hearing him out filled me with equal parts dread and something I couldn't quite name. A week later, I agreed to see him at a quiet diner on the edge of town, the kind with vinyl booths and a jukebox that hadn't worked in years. When I walked in, Darren was already seated, his shoulders hunched, a coffee untouched in front of him. He looked older somehow, the sharp edges of our last confrontation dulled by something heavier. He stood as I approached, but I motioned for him to sit. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The waitress filled my cup with coffee, then left us alone. Darren finally cleared his throat. "I was wrong," he said, his voice low. "We were all wrong. I can't change what happened, but I don't want to pretend it didn't matter." I wrapped my hands around the mug, the heat grounding me. "Why now?" I asked. He looked down at his hands. "Because I can't stop seeing your face that day, standing there with all those bags. I thought it was just Mom's decision, but we stood with her. We let her do it." The words hung in the air, heavy and raw. I didn't answer right away, letting the silence stretch. He looked up finally, his eyes tired. "I've started therapy," he said. "Dr. Doyle recommended a colleague, and I've been going. It's not much, but it's something." I studied him, searching for the defensiveness I had always known, but it wasn't there. Just weariness and maybe a kind of honesty I hadn't expected. "You should have told me sooner," I said softly. "I know," he said, "but I'm telling you now." The rest of the conversation moved slowly, cautious, as if we were both afraid of breaking whatever fragile truth had settled between us. He didn't ask for forgiveness. I didn't offer it. But something unspoken shifted a first crack in the wall that had been built around us. When I left the diner, the air outside felt lighter. My phone buzzed as I crossed the lot. It was an email from Barbara Harmon copied to Samuel Ortiz. "Savannah, the board has approved expansion of your campaign into 3 new regions. We'd like you to present at the national conference in Chicago next quarter." I stood by my car, the glow of the screen bright against the fading daylight. Back in my apartment, I spread the email printout beside the scarf on the table. 2 pieces of my life side by side, the reminder of betrayal and the proof of what I was building in spite of it. I thought of my mother, of her signed agreement for Sunnyvale, of the way she had looked at me when she realized I wouldn't bend anymore. I thought of Darren's tired eyes across the diner table and the possibility that the story wasn't finished yet. The balance had shifted again, and I knew the next step would test whether the boundaries I had set could truly hold. The morning of the national conference in Chicago began with the kind of quiet I hadn't felt in years. I stood in front of the mirror in my hotel room, adjusting the lapel of my jacket while my notes sat neatly arranged in a folder. The campaign had grown beyond anything I had imagined, and the board had chosen me to present it. As I gathered my things, my phone buzzed again, another call from my mother. I silenced it without hesitation. On stage, the lights were warm, the audience of executives and clients waiting as I began. My voice carried through the microphone with a steadiness that felt rooted in something deeper than preparation. I outlined projections, highlighted results, and spoke with authority I had earned. When I finished, the applause was immediate, Barbara Harmon rising from her seat to shake my hand. "Outstanding work," she said, her voice firm. "Your leadership shows." Later, in the quiet of the hotel lobby, I listened to my mother's latest voicemail. Her words tumbled out in the same practiced rhythm. "Savannah, I can't do this without you. Sunnyvale isn't enough. I need to live with family. Please." I ended the message before it finished, my hand steady, as I slipped the phone back into my bag. The following week, Dr. Doyle leaned back in her chair as I recounted the messages. "She's testing the boundaries you set," she said gently. "That doesn't mean you've failed. It means you're learning how to hold them." Her words steadied me, reminding me that every no was as important as the yes I had chosen carefully. Meanwhile, Darren called again. His tone carried the same quiet sincerity from the diner. "I wanted you to know," he said, "I've kept going to therapy. It's helping. I can see now how much Mom shaped us, and not always for the better." His honesty gave me pause, a crack in the pattern that felt real. "I don't expect forgiveness," he added, "but I do hope we can build something different." The weight of his words stayed with me. For the first time, I believed he might mean it. I told him I was willing to talk again, slowly, carefully, without promises. The conversation ended on a silence that felt open instead of closed. Back at work, the ripple effects of my presentation reached quickly. Samuel Ortiz called me into his office. "The board is impressed," he said, leaning back with a small smile. "You've secured expansion in 3 regions. Keep this up and your trajectory here is only upward." His words echoed long after I left, the sense of recognition, a contrast to the silence I had once endured at home. That weekend, I drove to Sunnyvale to see my mother's new apartment. The building was modest flower baskets hanging by the entrance, a small community garden blooming despite the early chill of spring. She opened the door when I knocked, her expression caught between pride and resentment. Inside the room was tidy, her belongings carefully arranged. "It's fine," she said, her tone clipped, "but it isn't home." I set a small plant on the counter, one I had picked up at the market. "It's a start," I said. Her eyes lingered on me, searching for something that wasn't there anymore. The silence stretched until she finally looked away. Back at my apartment, Nora and Grant strung new lights across my balcony. We sat outside with mugs of tea, the evening air cool but comforting. Nora looked at me with a quiet smile. "You've built something solid," she said, "piece by piece." I glanced at the scarf folded on my desk through the open door, its blue fabric catching the last of the daylight. The choices I had made were holding the boundaries firm. But as the sun dipped lower, I knew there were still unfinished conversations ahead, ones that would decide what parts of my family could remain in my life and what had to be left behind. A year later, I unlocked the door of my new condo and let the afternoon sun spill across the hardwood floors. The rooms were brighter than the studio had ever been, with wide windows that opened to the east and filled the mornings with light. I had hung my photographs in the living room, shorelines, forests, and quiet places I had captured during years when I didn't realize how much I needed those escapes. Now they greeted me each day like old friends. The promotion had turned into a steady climb. My team launched a national campaign that doubled our client list, and my work was recognized at conferences I once only dreamed of attending. At the same time, I kept seeing Dr. Doyle. Each session helped me steady the balance between who I had been and who I was becoming. It wasn't about forgetting the past, it was about choosing not to let it hold me still. My mother sat across from me during a family therapy session that spring, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't fight the way she once did. When Dr. Doyle asked what she noticed about my progress, she paused before answering. "She doesn't need me anymore," she said, her voice quieter than I expected. "And somehow that's made it easier to be proud of her." I nodded, not needing more than that. Perfection wasn't possible, but the poison was gone. Darren joined us sometimes, too. He looked younger after months of his own therapy, the sharpness in his tone replaced with a patience I hadn't seen since we were children. He helped string lights on my patio one evening while Nora arranged a platter of cheese. We sat together under the glow, our voices low, laughter rising every so often. It was a different kind of family, one built slowly with effort and choice. When the guests left that night, I unwrapped a framed photograph I had saved for myself. 15 black garbage bags lined up in front of my mother's house, captured on my phone the afternoon I carried them to my car. I hung it in my office above a folder that held the paperwork for a small grant program I had started. It funded deposits for young adults forced from their homes with nowhere to go. No one would have to face that kind of night alone if I could help it. Sometimes I still touched the scarf robin's egg blue worn from being folded and refolded. It reminded me of the day everything broke and the days after when I learned to stand without needing permission. I no longer kept it out of sorrow, but as a reminder of the distance between then and now. What I came to understand is that healing doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it means building something new from broken pieces, shaping a life that is steady and whole on your own terms. Justice, I learned, can be quiet. It can be a door you lock behind you at night, a paycheck you earned with your own name on it, a photograph hung where no one can dismiss it. I walked through my condo one last time that evening, turning off the lights, letting the city glow, fill the rooms instead. For the first time, I felt no trace of fear in the silence, only peace. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever rebuilt your life after losing what you thought you couldn't live without, I hope you'll share a piece of it in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, don't forget to subscribe so you can join me for the next one.